The room froze in a way that felt unnatural, like time itself had been told to stop. Caleb Rourke's hand hovered in the air, fingers stiff, palm open, close enough that the young woman against the marble wall could feel the heat from his skin. Elena's back pressed into cold stone. Her breath came fast and uneven, one arm raised instinctively to protect her face. The echo of their argument still hung in the space, sharp and unfinished, bouncing off glass walls and polished floors. No one moved. The house manager stood near the hallway, eyes lowered. The driver lingered by the door, pretending to check his phone. Security watched from a distance, trained to respond to threats from the outside, not the kind that lived inside the house. Caleb's jaw was tight. His chest rose and fell in quick, angry breaths. He had said things already that couldn't be taken back. Words meant to wound. Words chosen to remind, to dominate, to put his daughter back in her place. "You don't get to talk to me like that," he snapped. "Not under my roof." Elena tried to speak, but her voice broke before a sound came out. She swallowed hard, eyes glassy, not crying yet, but close. Very close. That was when a soft voice cut through the tension. "Please, don't hit her." It wasn't loud. It wasn't commanding. It didn't need to be. Everyone turned. Lillian Brooks stood a few steps away, one hand gripping the back of a chair as if it were the only thing keeping her upright. She was still in her work clothes. Flat shoes. Plain blouse. The uniform of someone meant to blend into the background. Her heart slammed so hard it made her dizzy. Her mouth felt dry. She hadn't planned to speak. She hadn't planned anything at all. Her body had moved before her mind could catch up. Caleb turned slowly, disbelief flickering across his face before it hardened into rage. "What did you just say?" he asked. Lillian took a breath that shook on the way in. She could feel everyone watching her now. The weight of years pressed down on her chest. Years of silence. Years of careful steps and lowered eyes. "Please," she said again. "Step away from her." Caleb laughed, sharp and humorless. "You're out of line," he said. "Go back to the kitchen." Elena looked at Lillian, confused, frightened. Her arm was still raised, her fingers trembling. Lillian stepped forward. The sound of her shoes against the floor felt impossibly loud. "That's your birth mother," she said. The words landed wrong, like something spoken in the wrong language. For a second, no one reacted. Caleb stared at her, then let out another laugh. This one louder. "Meaner." "That's not funny," he said. "You've gone too far." Lillian shook her head. Tears blurred her vision, but she kept going. "I'm not joking," she said. "I gave birth to her." Elena's knees buckled. She slid down the wall and hit the floor, the sound small but devastating. Her breath came in short, shallow gasps. "No," Elena whispered. "No, that's not." Caleb's raised hand lowered, then clenched into a fist. "Stop," he said to Lillian. "You don't know what you're talking about." "I do," Lillian said. Her voice cracked. "I've known for years." Silence rushed back into the room, heavier than before. Elena looked up at Caleb, eyes wide and searching. "Dad?" she said quietly. Caleb didn't answer. The moment stretched, unbearable, like a wire pulled too tight. And as the truth hovered between them, fragile and explosive, one question pressed into the air, unanswered and terrifying. What happens when the lie that built a life finally breaks? If you're feeling the weight of this moment already, you might want to stay close. Stories like this don't unfold gently, and the truth rarely comes without a cost. And if you're new here, you're always welcome to subscribe, not for noise but for stories that make you feel something real. Because what came next would change all of their lives, and none of them were ready for it. Lillian Brooks learned early how to disappear without leaving a trace. It started in a narrow house on the south side of Baton Rouge, where voices carried through thin walls and silence was often the safest answer. Her mother worked double shifts at a nursing home. Her stepfather drank too much and spoke too loudly. Lillian learned to move quietly, to clean up messes before anyone noticed them, to read moods the way other kids read books. If the front door slammed hard, she stayed in her room. If the television volume went up, she washed dishes. If someone was angry, she made herself useful. Being useful kept you safe. At school, teachers called her polite. She finished assignments early and never caused trouble. No one noticed how she sat in the back, how she avoided attention like it might burn her. Praise embarrassed her. Conflict terrified her. She learned another lesson young. Adults with power didn't explain themselves. They decided. You adapted. By 16, she was working weekends, cleaning offices and small houses with her mother's friends. People were different behind closed doors, she learned. Kinder sometimes. Crueler often. But always sure that someone like Lillian was invisible enough not to matter. She remembered the first time a woman she worked for forgot Lillian was in the room and started talking about her on the phone. About the girl. About trust. About how lucky some people were to have work at all. Lillian kept scrubbing the sink. Her hands shook, but her face stayed blank. That was disappearing. After high school, she didn't go to college. There was no money, and even if there had been, she wouldn't have known what to study. She took whatever work came. Hotels. Private homes. Night shifts. Cash jobs when she had to. She rented a small room behind a beauty supply store. The walls were thin. The air smelled like hair products and dust. At night, when everything finally went quiet, she sometimes let herself imagine a different life. Not a big one. Just one where she wasn't always bracing for something bad. Then she met him. He wasn't loud. He wasn't cruel. That was what made him dangerous in a way she didn't understand at first. He listened. He asked questions. He made her laugh. When she talked, he looked at her like her words mattered. She didn't notice the imbalance right away. The way he always chose the restaurant. The way he paid even when she offered. The way he talked about his future without ever using the word we. When she told him she was pregnant, his face didn't change much. That should have scared her. He said he needed time. Then space. Then nothing at all. The phone stopped ringing. Messages went unanswered. A woman called instead. His sister, she said. Polite. Controlled. She talked about options. About timing. About money. Lillian hung up and cried until her chest hurt. She worked harder after that. Longer shifts. Less rest. Her feet swelled. Her back ached. People noticed her pregnancy and made comments that felt too personal, too casual. Who's the father? Doing this on your own? You're young. You'll bounce back. She smiled. She always smiled. When labor started, it came fast and wrong. The hospital room was bright and cold. Voices overlapped. Machines beeped. Pain blurred into panic. Then everything went dark. She woke up hours later, throat dry, body weak, with a pounding headache and a crushing sense that something was missing. The nurse avoided her eyes. A social worker came in, speaking gently, explaining things too quickly. There had been complications. Severe blood loss. They'd needed consent forms. Temporary placement. Just until recovery. Lillian tried to focus, but the words slid past her like water. "Where's my baby?" she asked. The social worker squeezed her hand. "She's safe." That word safe stuck with her. When Lillian was discharged, she left the hospital with empty arms and paperwork she didn't fully understand. The room she rented felt smaller than ever. The silence felt louder. She waited for calls that never came. Days turned into weeks. Weeks into months. Eventually, life pushed forward, whether she was ready or not. Years later, standing in the Rourke house, watching Caleb Rourke's hand raised toward the girl with her eyes, Lillian felt that old instinct rise again, the urge to disappear. But something else rose with it. Something stronger. And as the past pressed against the present, one terrible truth became clear. She had been invisible once. She would not be invisible now. The man Lillian got involved with never raised his voice. That was the first thing that made him feel safe. He spoke carefully, like every word had been weighed before leaving his mouth. He wore clean shoes, smelled faintly of expensive soap, and never seemed rushed. When he asked how her day had been, he waited for the answer. When she laughed, he smiled like he'd earned it. They met through one of her cleaning jobs. She was wiping down counters in a small downtown office suite when he struck up a conversation, asking if the building manager was around. He thanked her when she pointed him in the right direction. Thanked her again when she held the door. Most people didn't notice her at all. He did. At first it was coffee. Then dinner. Then nights where he stayed over, careful not to leave anything behind. He never talked much about his family. He said his work was complicated. He said he preferred simple things. She believed him. Looking back, the imbalance was there from the beginning. He always decided where they went. He always paid. When she offered to cook, he praised her but never suggested they eat at her place. He talked about plans, trips, promotions, ideas, but they were always his plans, his future. Still, Lillian felt chosen. That mattered more than she wanted to admit. When she realized she was pregnant, she sat on the edge of her bed for a long time, staring at the test like it might change its mind. Her hands shook. Her heart raced, then slowed, then raced again. She told him that night. He listened, nodded, asked questions that sounded responsible. Then he leaned back in his chair and went quiet. "I need time," he said. Time turned into distance. Distance turned into silence. Her calls went unanswered. Her messages stayed unread. She told herself he was busy. That men process things differently. That she shouldn't panic. Then a woman called. She introduced herself as his sister. Her voice was calm, professional, almost kind. She said she wanted to talk about solutions. About how stressful unplanned situations could be. About how Lillian deserved support. She mentioned money. Not as a threat. Not as a bribe. As a convenience. Lillian listened until her chest felt tight. Then she said no. The line went quiet for a beat too long. The woman sighed. "Think about it," she said. "This doesn't have to be hard." After that, there were no more calls. Lillian worked through her pregnancy. She didn't have a choice. She scrubbed floors until her back screamed. She smiled at strangers who felt entitled to comment on her body, her life, her future. "You're doing this alone? You're brave. Hope the father comes around." She nodded. Thanked them. Went back to work. At night, she talked to her stomach. Quietly. She promised things she wasn't sure she could deliver. Safety. Love. Presence. Labor came early. The hospital lights were too bright. The bed was too narrow. Nurses moved fast, voices sharp with urgency. Pain tore through her in waves that left her breathless. She tried to focus, tried to stay conscious. Then something went wrong. She remembered shouting. Someone saying her blood pressure was dropping. Hands pressing down. The smell of antiseptic and fear. When she woke up, her body felt hollow. A nurse stood by the bed, adjusting something on a clipboard. A social worker came in soon after, pulling a chair close, speaking softly like she was addressing a child. There had been complications. Severe bleeding. Emergency decisions. The baby was alive. That was the good news. "She's being cared for," the social worker said. "Just until you recover." Lillian tried to ask questions, but her throat was dry, her head heavy. Papers were brought in. She signed where they pointed. Her hand barely felt like her own. When she asked to see her baby, the answer was delayed. Soon, they said. Soon never came. She left the hospital days later with a plastic bag of clothes and a folder of documents she didn't fully understand. Her arms felt wrong without weight in them. The air outside felt too big. She waited. She called numbers that rang and rang. She left messages that were never returned. Weeks passed. Then months. Eventually the call stopped going through at all. Years later, standing in a house that smelled like money and control, Lillian would finally understand something she hadn't been able to name back then. The disappearance of her child hadn't been an accident. It had been a decision. And someone very powerful had signed off on it. The paperwork came before the pain fully faded. Lillian remembered that part clearly. The way the ache in her body dulled just enough for her mind to start working again. The way the room felt too quiet after hours of alarms and hurried footsteps. The way sunlight pressed through the blinds in thin, unforgiving lines. A woman introduced herself as a hospital social worker. She wore a neutral-colored cardigan and carried a folder pressed tightly against her chest. Her voice stayed low and calm, even when Lillian asked questions she didn't seem prepared to answer. "There were complications," the woman said gently. "You lost a significant amount of blood. We had to make quick decisions." Lillian nodded, though her head felt heavy. Her lips were dry. Every movement sent a dull throb through her lower body. "Where's my baby?" she asked again. "She's stable," the woman said. "That's the most important thing." That answer didn't feel complete, but Lillian didn't have the strength to argue. Nurses came in and out, checking vitals, adjusting 4 lines, reminding her to rest. Every time footsteps approached, Lillian hoped it was someone bringing her child. It never was. The social worker returned later that afternoon with papers. She explained them slowly, carefully, as if reading from a script she'd memorized years ago. Temporary care. Medical necessity. Recovery period. "This doesn't mean anything permanent," the woman said. "It's just to ensure your baby is safe while you heal." Lillian tried to read the forms, but the words blurred together. Her hands trembled as she signed where the woman pointed. "You can see her soon," the woman promised. That night, Lillian slept in short, restless bursts. Every time she drifted off, she dreamed of crying she couldn't reach. Of a weight missing from her arms. Of a door closing somewhere she couldn't follow. The next morning she asked again. "She's still being monitored," a nurse said, eyes flicking toward the hallway. The morning after that, she was told the baby had been moved to a different unit. "Can I go there?" Lillian asked. "Not yet," the nurse said. "You need to rest." By the 3rd day, Lillian's panic pushed past exhaustion. She insisted on answers. Her voice shook, but it was firm. "I want to see my child." The nurse hesitated, then said she would check. No one came back. When the social worker finally returned, her tone had shifted slightly. Still kind. Still calm. But distant now. "There are procedures," she said. "Reviews. We're doing what's best for everyone involved." "For everyone?" Lillian repeated. The woman smiled gently, the way people do when they believe they're explaining something reasonable. "For the baby." That word again. "Safe. Best." Lillian was discharged 2 days later. They handed her a bag with her clothes and a folder of documents thicker than before. No one walked her to see her baby. No one explained what would happen next in clear terms. Outside, the air felt sharp and bright. Too alive. She stood on the sidewalk for a long moment, dizzy, clutching the folder to her chest like it might contain something warm. Cars passed. People talked and laughed and lived their lives. Lillian felt like she had stepped out of time. At home, she spread the papers across her small bed. She read them slowly now, sounding out the legal language, tracing sentences with her finger. Temporary placement. Consent acknowledged. Follow-up pending. There was a phone number at the bottom of one page. She called it. No answer. She left a message. Then another. Days passed. Then weeks. When she finally reached someone, they told her the case had been transferred. To where, they didn't say. Another number was given. That one led to a voicemail that was always full. She showed up at the hospital in person. A receptionist checked her name, frowned slightly, then said the case was no longer under their department. "Who has my baby?" Lillian asked. The woman avoided her eyes. "You'll need to contact social services." Social services sent her elsewhere. Elsewhere sent her back. Paperwork went missing. Deadlines passed without her knowing they existed. Every answer led to another closed door. Months later, a letter arrived. It said the placement was no longer temporary. It didn't explain why. Lillian sat on the edge of her bed for hours, holding that letter, unable to cry. The room felt too quiet. Her body still felt wrong, like it had been emptied and forgotten. She tried again. And again. Eventually the call stopped going through. Years later, in a glass-walled house overlooking a lake, Lillian would finally understand why nothing she did back then had ever been enough. Because the decision had already been made. And it hadn't been made by her. The Rourke house didn't feel like a home the first time Lillian walked into it. It felt like a museum where people lived carefully, afraid of touching the wrong thing. The driveway curved up toward the house in a smooth, deliberate line, as if even the land had been trained to behave. Glass walls reflected the gray of Lake Washington. Steel beams cut clean angles into the sky. Everything was quiet in a way that felt expensive. Lillian stood at the front entrance with her resume folded neatly in her bag, her shoes freshly cleaned, her shoulders already tense. She had worked in nice houses before, but this was different. This place didn't just show wealth. It enforced it. A woman named Patricia met her at the door. Late 40s. Crisp blazer. Clipboard held close. "You're here for housekeeping?" Patricia said, not a question. "Yes, ma'am." Patricia nodded and led her inside without small talk. The floors were polished stone, cool underfoot. Lillian noticed how her steps echoed. She adjusted her pace, making herself quieter without thinking. Old habits. "We value discretion here," Patricia said as they walked. "Privacy is everything." "I understand," Lillian replied. They passed rooms that looked untouched. A dining area with chairs no one seemed to sit in. A living room arranged like it had been staged for photos. The air smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and something colder. Metal, maybe. "The owner isn't involved in hiring," Patricia continued. "He expects things to run smoothly." Lillian nodded again. That suited her just fine. The interview was brief. Patricia skimmed her work history, asked about availability, reliability, comfort with long hours. No personal questions. No interest in who Lillian was beyond what she could do. That too felt familiar. "You'll start on a trial basis," Patricia said. "If there are no issues, it becomes permanent." Lillian thanked her, gathered her bag, followed Patricia toward the door. That was when she heard footsteps coming down the hall. Measured, confident, unhurried. Patricia straightened slightly. "That's Mr. Rourke," she said under her breath. Lillian didn't look right away. She waited until he entered her peripheral vision. Caleb Rourke was taller than she expected. Gray at his temples. Suit perfectly tailored even in his own house. His expression was neutral, but his eyes were sharp, scanning the room like it belonged to him completely. Which it did. Patricia introduced them. Caleb nodded once, already moving past her. "Hire her," he said, not slowing. "She looks capable." Lillian barely had time to respond before he disappeared down another hallway. The words echoed longer than they should have. She didn't realize her hands were shaking until Patricia handed her a schedule. That night, Lillian told herself the reaction meant nothing. Powerful people were intimidating. That was all. Her first weeks passed quietly. She learned the house's rhythms. Which rooms were off-limits. Which doors stayed locked. Which days Caleb was home and which days he wasn't. When he was around, the atmosphere shifted. Staff moved faster. Voices dropped. The house felt tighter somehow. Caleb didn't speak to her directly. Not once. But sometimes she felt his gaze linger, brief and unreadable, as if he were checking something off a list in his head. She told herself she was imagining it. Then one Friday afternoon, Patricia pulled her aside. "You'll be assisting with weekend preparation," she said. "His daughter is arriving." Lillian paused. "Daughter?" "Yes. She stays every other weekend. Keep the guest wing ready." Something tightened in Lillian's chest. She worked more carefully than usual that day. Straightened things that didn't need it. Smoothed sheets twice. When the car arrived, she was in the hallway carrying folded towels. She heard laughter first. Light. Young. Then she saw her. The girl stepped inside, backpack slung over one shoulder, hair pulled back loosely, eyes scanning the space like she was bracing herself. Lillian stopped walking. The towel slipped slightly in her arms. The girl's face wasn't identical. It didn't need to be. It was the eyes. The exact same shape. The exact same guarded look. The same way they took in a room, cautious and alert. The world tilted. Lillian's heart slammed against her ribs. Heat rushed to her face, then drained away, leaving her cold. She stared too long. She knew she did. The girl noticed. Their eyes met. For just a second. Confusion flickered across the girl's face. Curiosity. Something else Lillian couldn't name. Lillian forced herself to look away. She adjusted the towels, hands clumsy now. Her legs felt weak. As the girl's footsteps faded down the hall, Lillian leaned against the wall, breathing shallowly, her mind racing toward a thought she wasn't ready to say out loud. Because if she was right, then the past hadn't stayed buried. It had followed her here. From that day on, Lillian could no longer move through the house the same way. Before, it had been just another place to work. Large, quiet, demanding, but manageable. Now every hallway felt narrower. Every sound carried weight. Every time she heard light footsteps or a soft laugh, her body reacted before her mind could catch up. Elena. That was the girl's name. Lillian learned it the way she learned most things in the house, by listening without appearing to listen. Patricia said it casually one morning while assigning tasks for the weekend. Elena likes her room kept a certain way, she said. Minimal. No clutter. Lillian nodded, heart thudding. Minimal. Guarded. Careful. Fit. She avoided the girl at first. Not out of lack of care but fear. Fear of looking too long. Fear of saying too much. Fear of breaking something fragile just by existing too close to it. But avoidance was harder than she expected. Elena moved through the house like someone who knew it belonged to her and yet never fully trusted it. She didn't run or shout. She didn't make messes. She walked softly, almost apologetically, even though no one had ever told her she needed to. Lillian noticed everything. The way Elena hesitated before speaking to her father. The way her shoulders stiffened when his voice sharpened. The way she relaxed just slightly when he wasn't around. One afternoon, Lillian found herself in the kitchen late, finishing up after dinner. The house was quieter than usual. The staff had cleared out early. Rain tapped lightly against the windows. Elena appeared in the doorway, barefoot, holding a plate. "Is it okay if I take this?" she asked, gesturing toward a piece of leftover cornbread. "Of course," Lillian said too quickly, then softened her tone. "Help yourself." Elena smiled faintly. It wasn't a full smile. More like a habit. "My dad says not to eat too late," she said, half joking. Lillian shrugged. "Rules are different when you're still growing." Elena laughed. Just a small sound. But it warmed something in Lillian's chest that had been cold for years. They stood there for a moment, neither quite ready to leave. "You work here a lot," Elena said. "Yes," Lillian replied. "I like keeping busy." Elena nodded like she understood that better than most. After that, the small moments multiplied. Lillian left extra food covered neatly on the counter late at night, never mentioning it. Elena began appearing more often, always acting like it was coincidence. Once, Lillian folded Elena's laundry and caught herself smoothing the fabric more carefully than necessary. When Elena wore the clothes later, she glanced down at the folds, then back at Lillian. "Thanks," she said quietly. Lillian had to turn away. The resemblance haunted her. Not just the eyes. The mannerisms. The way Elena pressed her lips together when she was thinking. The way she tilted her head when she was uncertain. Lillian told herself it was coincidence. The mind could play cruel tricks when it wanted something to be true. But the feeling wouldn't leave. One evening, Lillian overheard Caleb speaking sharply to Elena in his office. The door wasn't fully closed. She hadn't meant to listen. "I expect better," he said. "You don't embarrass me like that." I wasn't trying to, Elena replied, voice tight. Intent doesn't matter. The door shut. Lillian stood frozen, rag in her hand, heart pounding. The tone was familiar. Not loud. Not explosive. Controlled. Dangerously so. That night, Lillian couldn't sleep. Memories pressed in from all sides. The hospital room. The empty bassinet. The paperwork. The years of silence. And now this girl. This house. This man. The next morning, while cleaning Caleb's study, Lillian noticed a file folder on the desk, slightly out of place. She wouldn't have touched it, except the corner caught her eye. A hospital name. Her hospital. Her breath caught. Her fingers hovered, then closed around the folder before she could stop herself. She opened it just enough to see dates. A birth date. Elena's. The room spun. Lillian closed the folder quickly, her pulse roaring in her ears. She stepped back, pressing a hand to her mouth to keep from making a sound. There was no doubt anymore. The girl with her eyes wasn't a coincidence. She was her daughter. And standing between them was a man who controlled everything, including the truth. Elena Rourke learned early that being quiet made life easier. Not because anyone told her to be silent. No one had to. The lesson came naturally, absorbed through tone and timing and the subtle ways her father's attention could turn sharp without warning. Caleb Rourke was never careless. He didn't shout often. He didn't throw things. When he was angry, his voice stayed level, his words precise. That made it worse somehow. There was no explosion to prepare for, no obvious signal to retreat. Just a calm sentence that landed like a verdict. You should know better. That wasn't appropriate. I expect more from you. Elena grew up measuring herself against expectations that were never fully explained. Excellence was assumed. Gratitude was required. Questions were tolerated only if they didn't challenge the foundation of her life. She knew she was adopted. That truth was presented to her early, framed as generosity. You were given a chance, Caleb told her once, sitting across from her at the long dining table. Not everyone gets that. She nodded. She always nodded. Her life was structured carefully. Private schools, tutors, music lessons, a schedule that left little room for boredom or rebellion. When teachers praised her discipline, Caleb accepted it as confirmation of his good judgment. At home, affection came in controlled doses. A hand on the shoulder after a recital. A nod of approval when grades arrived. Praise was efficient, not warm. Elena learned to earn it anyway. She learned not to cry in front of him. Tears made him uncomfortable. He'd pause, then say things like, "This isn't productive," or, "Compose yourself." So she did. At night, alone in her room, she let herself feel the things she couldn't name during the day. A tightness in her chest. A sense that she was performing a role written by someone else. Boarding school gave her distance but not freedom. Caleb called regularly. Asked about grades. Rarely about friends. When she tried to talk about how lonely it felt sometimes, he reminded her how fortunate she was. Most kids would kill for this opportunity. Elena stopped bringing it up. When she visited home every other weekend, the house felt too large. Too quiet. She moved through it carefully as if noise might set something off. Staff were polite but distant except for the maid, Lillian. Elena didn't know why she noticed her at first. Maybe it was the way Lillian never rushed her. Never sighed when Elena lingered in the kitchen. Never looked annoyed when Elena asked simple questions. One afternoon, Elena dropped a glass by accident. It shattered loudly against the floor. Her heart jumped. She waited for her father's voice. Instead, Lillian knelt beside her, calm. "Careful," she said gently. "Glass can be sneaky." Elena laughed nervously. "I'm sorry. I'll clean it up." Lillian shook her head. "I've got it. You didn't do anything wrong." The words felt strange, comforting, unfamiliar. Elena found herself hovering nearby, watching Lillian sweep up the pieces with steady hands. Something about her presence made the house feel less tense. less sharp. Still, Elena kept her guard up. She had learned that closeness came with conditions, that adults disappeared when you needed them most. She kept her feelings folded neatly inside, like clothes packed for a trip she wasn't sure she was allowed to take. As she got older, though, something shifted. She started noticing the way Caleb spoke about her life as if it were an extension of his own. The way decisions were made without consulting her. The way he talked about her future, schools, careers, connections, as if she were an investment being managed. At 16, she pushed back for the first time. It was small. A comment. A correction at dinner when Caleb exaggerated a story about one of her achievements. "That's not exactly how it happened," she said. The room went still. Caleb looked at her, eyes cool. "Are you contradicting me?" Elena felt the familiar pressure rise in her chest. But she didn't back down. "I'm just saying." Enough. The conversation ended there. Later that night, Elena sat on her bed, shaking. Not because she'd been yelled at. Because she hadn't. Because she could feel something breaking, slow and quiet, beneath the surface. And somewhere in the house, unseen but watching, Lillian felt it too. The fragile balance beginning to crack, and a truth straining to come loose. The bond between Lillian and Elena didn't announce itself. It formed the way dust settles, slowly, quietly, in the spaces no one thought to check. It began with small things. Unremarkable things. The kind that could easily be dismissed if anyone asked. Lillian started leaving food covered neatly on the counter when she noticed Elena skipping dinner more often. Nothing extravagant. Soup kept warm on the back burner. A sandwich wrapped carefully in foil. A note was never left. Lillian didn't want to draw attention. Elena noticed anyway. She would come into the kitchen late at night, hair loose, shoulders tense, and pause when she saw the food. She never said anything at first. She just ate quietly, like someone afraid the moment might disappear if acknowledged. One night she lingered. "You don't have to do this," Elena said, almost apologetically. Lillian rinsed a dish and shrugged. "Food shouldn't go to waste." Elena smiled faintly. "You always say that." "I've said worse things." That earned a real smile. Brief. Gone almost as soon as it appeared. Sometimes Lillian folded Elena's laundry when the other staff were busy. She did it more carefully than necessary, pressing the seams, smoothing the fabric like it mattered. When Elena put the clothes away later, she noticed. "They're folded differently," she said once. "Is that bad?" Lillian asked, genuinely worried. "No," Elena said quickly. "It's nicer." The word hung between them. They didn't talk much. Not in long conversations anyway. But there was a comfort in the shared silence. In the absence of expectation. Lillian never asked about school unless Elena brought it up. Never pried. Never lectured. That alone set her apart. Once, Elena sat at the kitchen island doing homework while Lillian cleaned. Music played softly from a small speaker. Nothing fancy. Just background noise. "Do you ever wish you'd done something else?" Elena asked suddenly. Lillian paused, sponge in hand. "Sometimes." "What would you have done?" Lillian thought about it. About all the lives she might have lived if things had gone differently. "I don't know," she said. "But wishing too hard can make the present harder." Elena nodded slowly, like she was storing the thought away. There were moments of lightness too. Once, Elena tried to help cook and nearly burned the rice. Lillian laughed before she could stop herself. "I think it's fighting back," she said, fanning smoke away. Elena laughed, surprised, then laughed harder. The sound echoed through the kitchen, bright and unguarded. It felt dangerous. Good. Brief. That night, Lillian cried in her room, quietly, so no one would hear. The more time passed, the harder it became to pretend she didn't know the truth. Every instinct in her screamed to protect, to claim, to explain. But fear kept her silent. Fear of losing her job. Fear of being accused of manipulation. Fear of hurting Elena with a truth she might not be ready to hear. And fear, deep, heavy fear, of Caleb Rourke. Lillian saw the way the house responded to him. The way staff stiffened when he entered a room. The way conversations stopped. The way decisions were never questioned. She saw it in Elena too. The careful tone. The measured responses. The way she watched her father's face before speaking. Lillian had lived under power like that before. She knew what it could do. So she stayed silent. She watched. She waited. She hoped for a moment that might never come. One afternoon, while cleaning near Caleb's study, Lillian heard raised voices inside. The door was cracked just enough. "I didn't mean it like that," Elena said. "Intent doesn't matter," Caleb replied. "Perception does." Lillian froze, rag clenched in her hand. The tone was controlled. Calm. Absolute. It chilled her. Later that evening, Elena passed Lillian in the hallway. Their eyes met. Elena hesitated, then said softly, "Thanks." "For earlier." "For what?" "For being normal." Lillian forced a smile, her chest tight. As Elena walked away, Lillian felt a terrible certainty settle in. This fragile, quiet bond, built on small kindnesses and unspoken understanding, was living on borrowed time. And when it broke, it wouldn't break gently. The study door was never supposed to be open. Lillian noticed it the moment she stepped onto the upper floor. Caleb was meticulous about his space. Doors closed. Files locked. Nothing left to chance. An open door, even by a few inches, felt like a mistake that didn't belong in this house. She slowed her steps. The hallway smelled faintly of wood polish and something sharper. Paper, maybe, or toner. Sunlight cut across the floor through tall windows, stopping just short of the study threshold. Lillian told herself to keep walking. She didn't. Inside the room was still. Too still. A large desk sat near the windows, perfectly arranged. No clutter. No personal photos. Just a manila folder placed slightly off-center, like it had been set down and forgotten. That was what caught her eye. Not curiosity. Recognition. The corner of the folder had curled upward, exposing a printed letterhead. One line was visible. A hospital name. Her hospital. Lillian's breath caught so sharply it hurt. She stood frozen, heart pounding, every instinct screaming that she was crossing a line that could never be uncrossed. If anyone walked in now, there would be no explaining it away. No pretending. She took one step closer. Then another. Her fingers hovered over the folder, trembling. For a brief moment she thought about Elena. About the girl's eyes. About the way she hesitated before speaking. About the quiet fear she carried like a second skin. Lillian opened the folder just enough to see inside. Dates leapt out at her first. Familiar ones. A birth date burned into her memory. A hospital admission number she had memorized during sleepless nights years ago. Her knees weakened. She flipped one page. Adoption paperwork. Private placement. Names she didn't recognize. Legal language she did. Her vision blurred. The room tilted. Lillian pressed a hand to the desk to steady herself, her pulse roaring in her ears. There it was. Proof. Not a feeling. Not a suspicion. Not a cruel coincidence. Truth typed neatly and signed at the bottom. Elena was her daughter. Lillian closed the folder quickly, hands shaking so badly she nearly dropped it. She placed it back exactly where it had been, aligning it with the edge of the desk, erasing any sign she had been there. Then she stepped back. Her chest felt tight, like the air had been pulled from the room. She stood there for a long moment, forcing herself to breathe quietly, to listen for footsteps. Nothing. She left the study on unsteady legs and went straight to the supply closet, closing the door behind her. The small space smelled of cleaning solution and dust. She leaned against the shelves and slid down until she was sitting on the floor. She covered her mouth with both hands and cried without sound. Images flooded her mind in fragments. The hospital room. The empty bassinet. The years of unanswered calls. And now this immaculate office, this powerful man, this life built on decisions made while she was bleeding and barely conscious. She stayed there until her breathing slowed, until the shock dulled enough for fear to take its place. Because knowing the truth was one thing. Deciding what to do with it was another. For the rest of the day, Lillian moved like she was underwater. She finished her tasks, answered questions, kept her eyes lowered. No one noticed anything different. That too felt wrong. She watched Elena from a distance that evening. The girl sat at the kitchen counter, scrolling through her phone, legs swinging slightly. She looked normal, safe, unaware. Lillian's chest ached. She imagined telling her, sitting her down, explaining everything, apologizing for the silence, reaching across the table and holding her hand. Then she imagined Caleb's reaction, the loss of her job, the accusations, the legal consequences she didn't fully understand, the possibility, terrifying and real, that she could be removed from Elena's life entirely. That night, Lillian lay awake, staring at the ceiling, the house quiet around her. She replayed every moment since arriving at the Rourke estate, searching for signs she might have missed. One thought kept circling back, refusing to be ignored. Caleb was too careful, too controlled, too aware. If she had found the truth by accident, what were the chances he didn't already know? The idea settled heavily in her chest. Because if Caleb knew who she was, and hired her anyway, then this wasn't just a secret. It was a trap slowly closing. And Lillian was standing right in the middle of it. Morning came too quickly. Lillian barely slept. When she did drift off, her dreams were sharp and fractured. Paperwork fluttering like birds, hospital lights flickering, Elena's voice calling her name from somewhere she couldn't reach. She rose before dawn, moving carefully through the quiet house. The floors were cool beneath her feet. The walls seemed closer than before, as if the estate itself had shifted overnight, tightening around her. In the kitchen, she made coffee she didn't drink. The cup trembled slightly in her hands. She kept replaying one question. Had Caleb left the study door open on purpose? At breakfast, everything felt normal on the surface. Too normal. Caleb sat at the head of the table, scanning news on his tablet. Elena ate toast, humming softly, half listening to something in her earbuds. The sound of silverware against porcelain filled the room. Lillian stayed focused on her tasks, refilling juice, wiping a spotless counter, avoiding eye contact. "Lillian," Caleb said suddenly. Her heart jumped. "Yes, sir?" He looked up from the tablet, his expression unreadable. "You've been here a few weeks now." "Yes." "You're settling in?" The question was simple. The tone was not. "I am," she said carefully. "Thank you." Caleb studied her for a moment longer than necessary. His gaze was steady, analytical, as if he were measuring something invisible. "Good," he said at last. "I value consistency." Elena glanced up, smiling faintly. "She's nice. I like her." Lillian's throat tightened. Caleb nodded once. "I'm glad." That was it. He returned to his screen. The moment passed, leaving behind a residue of tension that clung to Lillian long after breakfast ended. Later that morning, Caleb asked her to bring tea to the study. The request hit her like a physical blow. "Yes, sir," she said, her voice barely steady. The hallway felt longer than usual. Each step echoed. She balanced the tray carefully, focusing on the weight of the porcelain, the warmth of the cup, anything but the pounding of her heart. The study door was open again. Wide open this time. Caleb sat behind the desk, reviewing documents. He didn't look up as she entered. "Set it there," he said, gesturing to the same spot where the folder had been. Lillian's fingers went numb. She placed the tray down, her movements precise. She straightened, ready to leave. "Lillian," Caleb said. She froze. "Yes." He leaned back slightly in his chair, folding his hands. His eyes finally met hers. "You worked at St. Mary's Hospital," he said casually. The words landed with quiet violence. "Yes," she replied. "Years ago. In maternity." Pause. Deliberate? Yes. Caleb tilted his head. You were there in April. 15 years ago. Lillian felt the room tilt. I was, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Silence stretched between them. The clock on the wall ticked loudly, each second a countdown she couldn't see. You were a good nurse, Caleb said. Dedicated. Compassionate. Her chest tightened. Thank you. I've always admired people who care deeply, he continued. It's rare. Something in his tone shifted. Not warmth. Precision. I imagine, he said, that working in that ward came with difficult moments. Lillian swallowed. It did. Loss, Caleb said softly. Regret. Decisions made under pressure. Her hands curled into fists at her sides. Yes. Caleb stood then, walking around the desk slowly. His footsteps were unhurried, controlled. He stopped a few feet from her. Do you believe, he asked, that the past has a way of resurfacing? Lillian looked at the floor. She met his eyes, she might shatter. I think, she said carefully, that the past never really leaves us. Caleb smiled. It wasn't kind. That's a wise answer, he said. You may go. Lillian didn't wait. She turned and left the study, her legs shaking, her pulse racing so loudly she was sure he could hear it. In the hallway, she pressed a hand to the wall to steady herself. He knew. Not suspected. Knew. The rest of the day passed in fragments. Whispers of movement. Glances that lingered too long. A house that felt alert, watching. That evening, Elena found Lillian in the garden, trimming hedges that didn't need trimming. You okay? Elena asked. Lillian looked up, startled. Yes. Just tired. Elena hesitated, then sat on the low stone wall nearby. My dad's been weird today. Lillian's heart skipped. Weird how? I don't know, Elena said. Quieter. Like he's thinking about something he doesn't want to talk about. Lillian forced a small smile. Adults do that sometimes. Elena studied her, eyes searching. You ever feel like people don't tell you the truth because they think they're protecting you? The question cut deep. Yes, Lillian said softly. All the time. Elena nodded slowly. Me too. As night fell, Lillian stood alone in her room, staring at the door. Caleb hadn't confronted her. Hadn't accused her. Hadn't fired her. Which meant this wasn't about exposure. It was about control. And whatever Caleb was planning, it hadn't reached its final move yet. Not even close. By the time Lillian woke, the house already felt awake. Not loud. Not busy. Where? She lay still for a moment, listening. The distant hum of the HVAC system. Footsteps somewhere below. A door opening, then closing with careful restraint. Caleb was an early riser. Always had been. She dressed slowly, choosing neutral colors, hands steady by force of habit. The mirror reflected a woman who looked composed enough, but her eyes told a different story. They carried the weight of someone waiting for a knock that hadn't come yet. Downstairs, the house smelled of polished wood and fresh coffee. Elena was already gone, school day. Caleb stood in the kitchen, sleeves rolled up, pouring himself a cup. Morning, he said without turning. Good morning, Lillian replied. She moved toward the sink, instinctively keeping distance. Her muscles were tight, prepared for another quiet interrogation disguised as small talk. Caleb turned then, leaning against the counter. He watched her for a moment, his expression unreadable. I have an appointment today, he said. I'll be out most of the afternoon. Lillian nodded. I'll make sure everything's handled here. I'm sure you will, he said. Another pause. Another test. There's a box in the garage, Caleb continued. Old things. I'd like you to organize it. The request sounded harmless. Lillian's stomach dropped. Yes, sir. Caleb took a sip of coffee, eyes never leaving her face. Take your time. The garage was cool and dim, dust floating lazily in the light spilling through the narrow windows. The box sat near the back wall, larger than she expected, sealed with tape that had yellowed with age. She knelt slowly, heart pounding, and peeled the tape away. Inside were files. Not household records. Not manuals. Medical paperwork. Her breath caught. Hospital discharge forms. Birth records. Photocopies of consent signatures. Notes written in a familiar, looping handwriting. Her own. Lillian sank back on her heels. Caleb hadn't just researched her. He had reconstructed her life. At the bottom of the box was a small, worn envelope. No label. Just a faint crease where it had been opened and closed many times. Inside was a photograph. A newborn baby. Swaddled. Eyes closed. A hospital bracelet visible on a tiny wrist. The name on the bracelet made her hands shake. Elena. The garage door creaked open. Lillian shoved the photo back into the envelope, her pulse roaring in her ears. Caleb stood in the doorway. I wondered how long it would take, he said calmly. Lillian rose slowly, every movement deliberate. There was no point pretending now. You planned this, she said. Caleb stepped inside, closing the door behind him. The sound echoed like a lock sliding into place. I plan to understand, he corrected. There's a difference. You hired me, Lillian said, her voice tight. You brought me into your home. Around her. Yes, Caleb said. Because coincidence stopped being believable. He picked up one of the files, flipping through it with practiced ease. You left St. Mary's abruptly. No explanation. No reference requests. You disappeared. I had reasons, Lillian said. I'm sure you did. Caleb set the file down and looked at her fully now. Do you remember the night Elena was born? Lillian's chest ached. Every second. She was taken from the delivery room, Caleb said. There was confusion. Paperwork errors. A delay. Lillian's voice broke. I tried to stop it. Caleb's eyes sharpened. Tried. They told me the mother had signed the release, Lillian said. I knew something was wrong. She was sedated. She didn't understand. And yet, Caleb said quietly, my daughter left that hospital without her. Lillian swallowed hard. I followed the protocol I was allowed to. And when I realized what had happened, it was too late. Caleb studied her. Not with rage. With grief. You stayed, he said slowly. You stayed near Elena's records. You checked on her anonymously. You watched. Yes, Lillian whispered. I couldn't let her disappear completely. And you never told me, he said. I didn't know who you were, she said. Not at first. And when I did, I was afraid. Caleb nodded once. Fear is a powerful silencer. He walked toward the workbench, picking up the photograph again. His fingers trembled just slightly. You knew who her mother was, he said. And you said nothing. Lillian met his eyes. I was protecting her. Caleb let out a low, humorless laugh. You were protecting yourself. The words stung because they weren't entirely wrong. I never meant to hurt her, Lillian said. Or you. Caleb turned back to her, expression hardening. Intent doesn't erase impact. Silence settled between them, heavy and final. I won't expose you, Caleb said at last. Not yet. Lillian's breath caught. But understand this, he continued. You don't get to decide what happens next. He opened the garage door, letting light spill back in. Finish organizing the box, he said. We'll talk again soon. As he walked away, Lillian stared at the photograph still clutched in her hands. Because now she understood. Caleb wasn't searching for justice. He was preparing for something far more dangerous. The house changed after that. Not in ways anyone could name. There were no locked doors. No raised voices. No obvious tension that could be pointed to and explained. But the air felt heavier. Lillian felt it the moment she stepped back inside from the garage. The silence pressed indifferently now, no longer neutral. It felt intentional, like a held breath. She finished her work for the day on instinct alone. Laundry folded. Floors wiped. Dinner prepared with steady hands that didn't feel steady at all. Every task was a way to avoid thinking about the photograph still burned into her mind. Elena. Her child. Not by blood in the way most people meant it, but by choice. By consequence. By a moment 15 years ago that never loosened its grip. Caleb didn't return until late afternoon. She heard his car before she saw him. The soft crunch of tires on gravel. The car door closing with controlled force. No hurry. No hesitation. He walked in as if nothing had happened. "How was your day?" he asked casually, hanging his coat. "Quiet," Lillian replied. "Good." That was all. Dinner passed with Elena chatting about school, a substitute teacher who kept calling attendance wrong, a classmate who cried over a missed quiz. Lillian listened carefully, nodding in the right places, smiling when expected. Caleb listened too. But his attention wasn't on Elena. It was on Lillian. Every pause. Every shift in posture. Every breath she took. After dinner, Elena disappeared upstairs to finish homework. The house settled again into its low hum. Caleb stood at the sink, rinsing his plate. "You should sit," he said without looking back. Lillian did. He dried his hands slowly, then turned and leaned against the counter across from her. "I had lunch with someone today," he said. Her chest tightened. "Oh. A former administrator from St. Mary's." The words landed cleanly. "Sure." "He remembers you," Caleb continued. "Said you were dependable. Quiet. Never caused trouble." Lillian nodded once. "I tried to do my job." "He also remembered a complaint," Caleb added. "Filed internally. Never escalated." Her throat closed. "You questioned a release form," he said. "Said the mother wasn't in a condition to consent." "Yes." "And you were overruled." "Yes." Caleb folded his arms. "Did you ever consider going public?" Lillian met his gaze. "I did. And you didn't." "They had lawyers," she said. "I had student loans and no proof." Caleb studied her. "So you walked away." "I survived," she corrected quietly. He looked away for the first time, jaw tightening. "Elena's biological mother didn't," he said. The statement hung between them. "She spiraled," Caleb went on. "Addiction. Shelters. Medical debt. She died when Elena was 9. Lillian's breath hitched. "I didn't know." "She never recovered from losing her child," he said. "She believed Elena was dead. That's what they told her." Lillian closed her eyes briefly. Her hands trembled in her lap. "I tried to find her," Lillian whispered. "Years later. But she was gone." Caleb nodded. "I know." She opened her eyes. "You know? I hired people," he said. "I needed to understand every angle." The room felt smaller. "And now?" Lillian asked. Caleb's gaze sharpened again. "Now I'm deciding what truth is worth telling." A chill crept up her spine. "Elena doesn't know," she said. "Please don't tell her like this." "Not without care." Caleb's lips curved faintly. Not a smile. Something colder. "You don't get to advise me on parenting," he said. The word struck harder than a shout. Lillian nodded slowly. "You're right." Silence returned, thick and uneasy. That night, Lillian lay awake long after the house went dark. The ceiling above her seemed impossibly far away. Around midnight, she heard footsteps outside her door. They paused. Her heart pounded. Then continued down the hall. The next morning, Elena cornered her in the pantry. "Can I ask you something weird?" Elena said, lowering her voice. Lillian forced a calm smile. "Of course." Elena hesitated. "Did you ever work at a hospital?" Lillian's pulse spiked. "Yes. A long time ago." Elena nodded slowly. "My dad was looking at old medical stuff last night." The room tilted. "He didn't say much," Elena added. Just asked if I remembered anything from when I was really little. Lillian's mouth went dry. Do you? Elena shrugged. Just feelings. Like being held by someone who wasn't him. Lillian's chest ached. Elena studied her face carefully. Why do you look like you're about to cry? Lillian reached out before she could stop herself, then caught her hand midair. I'm not, she said softly. Sometimes memories make people emotional. Elena didn't look convinced. As she walked away, Lillian leaned against the pantry shelf, breath shaking. Because Caleb hadn't confronted Elena yet. He was circling. And when he finally struck, the truth wouldn't just hurt. It would tear everything apart. The next few days moved with a strange, deliberate slowness. Caleb became precise in ways Lillian hadn't seen before. Not cruel. Not overtly controlling. Just exact. Conversations were timed. Questions were measured. Silences were allowed to stretch until they became uncomfortable. It felt like living inside a chess match where she couldn't see the board. Elena noticed. She grew quieter at breakfast, more distracted after school. She lingered near Lillian longer than usual, asking small questions that carried too much weight for their size. What was your first job? Do you believe people can forget things on purpose? Have you ever loved someone you weren't supposed to? Lillian answered carefully. Always truth adjacent. Never complete. One afternoon, Caleb asked Lillian to drive Elena to an appointment. It was the first time he'd trusted her with that responsibility alone. Or the first time he'd tested her. They rode in silence for several minutes, the hum of traffic filling the space between them. Elena stared out the window, fingers tapping lightly against her knee. You know, Elena said suddenly, my dad keeps asking about memories lately. Lillian kept her eyes on the road. Memories come and go. Sometimes they resurface when we least expect them. Elena frowned. Do you think memories can lie? The question hit harder than the others. I think, Lillian said slowly, memories can be incomplete. Especially when someone was very young. Elena nodded, absorbing that. He asked if I remembered my birth. Lillian's grip tightened on the steering wheel. And? She asked gently. I said no, Elena replied. But that wasn't completely true. Lillian's breath caught. What do you remember? Elena hesitated, choosing her words carefully. I remember voices. A woman crying. Someone saying my name wrong. The light turned red. The car stopped. Wrong how? Lillian asked. Different, Elena said. Like it didn't belong to me yet. Lillian swallowed hard. I didn't tell him that part, Elena added. It scared him. Lillian glanced at her. How could you tell? Elena shrugged. He gets this look. Like he's bracing for something. The light turned green. Lillian drove on. Do you think, Elena said quietly, that people keep secrets because they're bad people, or because they're afraid of breaking someone? The question lodged deep in Lillian's chest. I think, she said, voice low, most secrets come from fear. Fear doesn't make someone bad, but it can still cause harm. Elena nodded slowly. That makes sense. They didn't speak again until they reached the office building. Elena hopped out of the car, then paused. You're easy to talk to, she said. I feel like you understand things before I explain them. Lillian forced a smile. Sometimes listening is enough. That evening, Caleb was waiting in the living room when Lillian returned. Elena went upstairs without a word. Caleb didn't ask how the appointment went. Sit, he said. Lillian did. I've been thinking, Caleb began, hands folded, posture calm. About intent. She said nothing. You claim you stayed silent to protect Elena, he continued. But silence doesn't stop harm. It just delays it. I know, Lillian said softly. Do you? He asked. She met his gaze. I live with it every day. Caleb studied her for a long moment. I spoke to someone else, he said. A social worker. Retired. Lillian's heart skipped. She remembered the case, he continued. Remembered a nurse who stayed late, who argued, who tried to document irregularities. Lillian closed her eyes briefly. She said that nurse disappeared shortly after, Caleb said. No explanation. No goodbye. I was warned, Lillian said. They told me to stop asking questions, that I'd lose my license. And yet, Caleb said, voice tightening, you kept copies. Lillian looked up sharply. The files, he said. You kept them. Not all of them, but enough. I didn't know if I'd ever need them, Lillian said. I just knew I couldn't destroy them. Caleb exhaled slowly. You held on to the truth, but only for yourself. Yes. For 15 years, he said. You watched from a distance. You stayed away. I stayed because I was told to, Lillian said. And because I was afraid. Caleb leaned forward. Afraid of what? Lillian's voice cracked. That Elena would hate me. Silence fell heavy between them. I don't want revenge, Caleb said finally. I want clarity. Lillian nodded. Then tell her. Carefully. With help. Caleb stood. I will. Her heart sank. Tomorrow, he added. Lillian rose abruptly. Please. Let me be there. Caleb's expression hardened. You don't get to rewrite the ending. I don't want to rewrite it, she said. I just don't want it to destroy her. Caleb looked away, jaw tight. You should get some rest, he said. Tomorrow will be difficult. As he walked away, Lillian stood frozen. Upstairs, Elena's door creaked open. Lillian looked up just in time to see her standing at the top of the stairs, pale and shaken. I heard my name, Elena said softly. And in that moment Lillian knew. The truth had already started leaking through the cracks. And it wasn't waiting for permission anymore. Morning arrived wrapped in tension. The house was quiet but not asleep. Lillian sensed it the moment she stepped into the hallway. Doors were closed that were usually open. Lights were on in rooms that should have been empty. Elena didn't come down for breakfast. Caleb stood alone in the kitchen, jacket already on, tie perfectly straight. He looked like a man heading into a boardroom, not a conversation that could fracture a family. She's still upstairs, Lillian said carefully. I know, Caleb replied. I told her to take her time. Lillian poured coffee she didn't want. Her hands shook enough that a few drops spilled onto the counter. Caleb noticed. He always noticed. We'll talk after, he said. After what? Lillian asked. After I tell her. The words felt final. Like a door closing. Caleb glanced at his watch. I have a meeting later. I don't want to rush this. Lillian swallowed. You're planning to leave right after? Yes. The unfairness of it burned. She'll need time, Lillian said. Questions. Reassurance. Caleb's jaw tightened. I've raised her for 15 years. I know what she needs. Lillian didn't argue. She knew better. A few minutes later, Elena came downstairs. She moved slowly, shoulders tense, eyes guarded. She didn't look at Lillian. That hurt more than anything else. Elena, Caleb said gently, sit with me for a moment. Elena hesitated, then sat on the couch across from him. Her hands folded tightly in her lap. Lillian stayed by the doorway, uncertain. Caleb glanced at her. You can stay. Elena looked up sharply. Why? Caleb inhaled. Because this involves her. Silence fell hard. Elena's gaze flicked between them. What's going on? Caleb leaned forward, elbows on his knees. His voice was steady, practiced, but something beneath it trembled. When you were born, he said, there were things that went wrong. Things I didn't understand at the time. Elena's brow furrowed. What kind of things? There were decisions made without proper consent, he continued. Mistakes. And people who didn't speak up when they should have. Elena's breathing quickened. Are you saying I was stolen? The word hung there raw and sharp. Caleb flinched. No, not stolen. But separated. Elena shook her head. From who? Caleb hesitated. Lillian felt the moment slipping, spiraling out of control. From your birth mother, Caleb said at last. Elena's face drained of color. My mother died, she said quickly. You told me that. I told you what I was told, Caleb replied. The truth is more complicated. Elena stood abruptly. This isn't funny. I'm not joking, Caleb said softly. Elena's eyes filled with tears. Then why does it feel like you're lying now? Caleb looked at Lillian just for a second. That glance was enough. Elena followed it. Her eyes locked onto Lillian. No, Elena whispered. No, no, no. Lillian stepped forward instinctively. Elena. You worked at the hospital, Elena said, voice shaking. You knew things. You knew me. Lillian stopped. Yes, she said quietly. Elena backed away as if struck. So this whole time, you were just watching me? No, Lillian said, tears spilling now. I was protecting you. Elena laughed, sharp and broken. From what? From the truth. Caleb stood. Elena, listen. Did you know her? Elena demanded, pointing at Lillian. My birth mother. Did you know her? Lillian's voice trembled. I tried to help her. That's not what I asked. Yes, Lillian whispered. I knew her. Elena's breath hitched. And you let me grow up thinking she abandoned me. I didn't let it happen, Lillian said. I didn't have the power to stop it. Elena turned to Caleb, tears streaming. You knew all this and you still brought her into our house? Caleb hesitated. Just a fraction too long. Yes, he said. That hesitation shattered something. Elena let out a sound halfway between a sob and a laugh. So I'm an experiment now? A lesson? No, Caleb said sharply. You're my daughter. Elena wiped her face angrily. Then why does it feel like everyone's been deciding things for me my whole life? She bolted up the stairs. Elena. Caleb called. A door slammed. The sound echoed through the house like a gunshot. Lillian sank onto the couch, chest heaving. You shouldn't have done it like that. Caleb ran a hand through his hair, composure cracking. There's no good way to do it. There were better ways, Lillian said. Caleb turned on her, eyes blazing. You don't get to judge me now. Lillian stood shaking. I'm not judging. I'm scared. For her, Caleb snapped. For both of you, she said. Upstairs something crashed. Blast. Caleb froze. They stared at the ceiling. Another sound followed. A drawer being yanked open. Then silence. Too much silence. Caleb moved toward the stairs, heart pounding. And Lillian knew with chilling certainty that Elena wasn't just crying anymore. She was searching. And once she found what she was looking for, nothing in that house would ever be the same again. Caleb took the stairs two at a time. Stay here, he barked over his shoulder. Lillian ignored him. She followed, her legs unsteady, every step ringing with the echo of Elena's slammed door. The hallway upstairs felt narrower than before, the air thick with panic. Elena, Caleb called, stopping outside her room. Open the door. No answer. He knocked once. Then harder. Elena, please. Still nothing. Lillian caught up, breathless. She needs space, she whispered, even as fear tightened her chest. Caleb turned the handle. The door was unlocked. They stepped into a room that looked like a storm had passed through. Drawers pulled out. Mattress half shoved off the bed. Books scattered across the floor. Elena stood near her desk, clutching a small metal box Lillian recognized instantly. Her keepsake box. The one Caleb kept locked in the study. How did you? Caleb began. I watched you, Elena snapped, eyes blazing. I saw where you hid the key. She opened the box with shaking hands and pulled out a folded document. This, she said, voice breaking, has my name on it. And another woman's. Caleb went still. Lillian's knees nearly gave out. Elena looked at the paper again as if hoping it would change. It says, biological mother. Why does it say that? Caleb took a step closer. Elena, let's sit down. No, she said sharply. No more sitting. No more waiting. She turned to Lillian, eyes burning. You knew. All this time. You looked at me every day knowing I wasn't hers. I knew you were hers, Lillian said softly. Just not in the way you were told. Elena let out a bitter laugh. That's convenient. I never stopped thinking about you, Lillian continued. Not once. That doesn't make it okay, Elena snapped. No, Lillian agreed. It doesn't. Elena's hands trembled as she flipped through more papers. Hospital forms. Notes. Dates that lined up too perfectly to deny. She didn't give me up, Elena whispered. Did she? Caleb closed his eyes. No, he said quietly. She didn't. Elena's breath came out in a sob. Then why wasn't she there? Because the system failed her, Lillian said. And because people with power made choices that were easier for them. Elena turned on her. And you just let it happen? I tried to stop it, Lillian said, tears spilling freely now. I was threatened. I was young. I was scared. So you ran? Elena said. Yes, Lillian said. And I've hated myself for it ever since. The honesty knocked the air out of the room. Elena sank onto the edge of her bed, the papers slipping from her fingers. She pressed her palms into her eyes, shoulders shaking. I don't know who I am, she whispered. Caleb moved closer, kneeling in front of her. You're my daughter. Elena looked at him sharply. Am I? Yes, he said firmly. In every way that matters. You knew, she said. And you still waited. You let me find out like this. Caleb's voice cracked. I thought I was protecting you. Elena shook her head. Everyone keeps saying that. She stood suddenly and brushed past them, heading for the door. Where are you going? Caleb asked. Somewhere no one knows my story better than I do, she said. Somewhere quiet. Elena, Lillian said, stepping forward. Please don't go alone. Elena stopped at the doorway. She didn't turn around. Were you ever going to tell me? She asked Lillian quietly. Lillian swallowed hard. I was waiting for the moment that hurt you the least. Elena let out a soft, humorless breath. You waited too long. She left. The sound of the front door slamming below echoed through the house. Caleb stood frozen, staring at the empty hallway. I didn't mean for this, he said, voice hollow. Lillian moved past him, already grabbing her coat. Meaning well doesn't stop consequences. Where do you think she went? He asked. Lillian paused, her hand on the banister. Somewhere connected to the truth. Caleb's phone buzzed in his hand. A notification. He looked at the screen, face draining of color. What is it? Lillian asked. Caleb's voice was barely audible. She accessed an old address. Lillian's heart dropped. Whose? Caleb looked up at her. Her birth mother's last known shelter. And in that moment, Lillian knew the next truth Elena uncovered wouldn't just answer questions. It would reopen wounds that had never healed. And this time there would be no way to contain the fallout. By the time they reached the car, rain had started to fall. Not heavy. Just enough to blur the edges of the world and make everything feel unstable. Caleb drove. Too fast. One hand tight on the steering wheel, the other clenched around his phone, refreshing the tracking app he hadn't admitted he still used. She turned it off, he said flatly. Lillian stared out the window. Streetlights streaked across the glass. That means she knows you'd look. Caleb didn't respond. The shelter sat on the edge of the city, tucked between an abandoned strip mall and a warehouse that had seen better decades. The parking lot was half empty. The building itself was low and unassuming, brick worn smooth by time and weather. They parked across the street. Caleb hesitated for the first time since getting behind the wheel. What if she doesn't want us there? He asked. Lillian opened her door. Then we don't force anything. But we don't disappear again. Inside, the shelter smelled of disinfectant and old coffee. A woman at the front desk looked up, her expression cautious but kind. "Can I help you?" she asked. Caleb cleared his throat. "We're looking for a teenager. She may have come in asking questions." The woman's eyes flicked between them. "Name?" "Elena," Lillian said quickly. "She's 15. The woman nodded slowly. "She's here." Caleb exhaled sharply. "She's talking to one of our counselors," the woman continued. "She asked for privacy." Caleb took a step forward. "I'm her father." The woman held up a hand. "And she asked us to tell you that." Silence. Lillian felt the weight of it settle between them. "Can we wait?" Lillian asked gently. The woman studied her, then nodded. "You can sit." They waited on plastic chairs beneath buzzing fluorescent lights. Minutes stretched. Every sound felt amplified, the click of a keyboard, a door opening and closing somewhere down the hall. Caleb stared straight ahead, jaw clenched. "I thought I could control this." Lillian looked at him. "That was never possible." After what felt like an hour, a door opened. Elena stepped out. Her eyes were red. Her posture rigid. She looked older somehow, like something had been stripped away. She saw them immediately. "I didn't tell them where I live," she said flatly. "We didn't ask," Caleb replied. Elena crossed her arms. "I talked to someone who knew her." Lillian's heart pounded. "What did they say?" "That she came back," Elena said. "Years later. Asking for me." Caleb sucked in a breath. "She was sober then," Elena continued. "Working. Trying to get stable. She believed I was dead." Lillian closed her eyes. "She died thinking that," Elena said. "Didn't she?" Lillian nodded, tears slipping free. "Yes." Elena laughed softly. Not with humor. With disbelief. "So she never stopped wanting me?" "No," Lillian said. "She never did." Elena looked at Caleb. "And you never told me." Caleb's voice cracked. "I didn't know how." Elena shook her head. "You always think there's a right time. There isn't." She turned toward the exit. "Elena," Lillian said, stepping forward. "Please." Elena paused. "Did she love me?" Elena asked quietly. Lillian didn't hesitate. "With everything she had." Elena nodded once. Then she walked out into the rain. Caleb moved to follow, but Lillian stopped him with a hand on his arm. "Let her breathe," she said. "This is the first truth that's been fully hers." Caleb watched through the glass as Elena stood under the awning, rain soaking her hair, face turned upward like she was letting it wash something away. After a long moment she turned back. "I'm not going home yet," she said. "But I'm not running either." Caleb swallowed. "Where will you go?" Elena looked at Lillian. "I want to hear everything," she said. "From the beginning. No gaps. No protection." Lillian felt her chest tighten. "Are you sure?" Elena nodded. "I'm tired of half-truths." They drove in silence to a small diner a few blocks away. Neon lights flickered in the window. The place was nearly empty. They took a booth in the back. Elena slid into the seat across from Lillian. "Start," she said. Lillian wrapped her hands around a mug of coffee she hadn't ordered. And as she began to speak, about the night of the birth, the signatures that didn't make sense, the threats, the choice to leave, Elena listened without interruption. Halfway through, her phone buzzed. A message lit the screen. She read it once. Then again. Her face drained of color. "What is it?" Caleb asked. Elena looked up slowly. "They found another record," she said. "A sealed one." Lillian's heart skipped. "Another what?" Elena swallowed hard. "Proof," she said, "that someone else signed those papers." And in that instant Lillian understood. The truth they'd been circling wasn't finished unfolding. Not even close. The diner suddenly felt too small. The hum of the refrigerator behind the counter. The clink of a spoon against a mug. The low murmur of a couple arguing 3 booths away. All of it faded beneath the weight of Elena's words. Who? Caleb asked. Elena shook her head slowly. It doesn't say. Just that a second signature was added hours later. Different handwriting. Different ID number. Lillian's stomach twisted. That means the release wasn't just forged once. It means someone came back, Elena said. After my birth mother was already sedated. After everything should have been done. Caleb leaned back, running a hand over his face. I always assumed it was hospital corruption. Or some administrative cover-up. So did I, Lillian whispered. But this was personal, Elena finished. Silence wrapped around the booth. Elena looked between them. Who would benefit from me being taken away from her? Caleb didn't answer. Lillian did. Someone who wanted you, she said. Or someone who wanted her out of the way. Caleb's jaw tightened. You're suggesting this wasn't about money or convenience. I'm suggesting it was targeted, Lillian said. Elena's phone buzzed again. She stared at the screen. They sent more, she said. The ID number matches someone on staff. Caleb leaned forward. Who? Elena read the name, then froze. I don't recognize it, she said. But the job title is Legal Liaison. Lillian's breath caught. That role didn't exist in maternity, she said. That's corporate. Hospital ownership. Caleb's eyes darkened. The hospital was owned by a private network back then. I remember negotiating contracts. Which means, Lillian said slowly, this wasn't a rogue nurse or a clerk. This went higher. Elena looked up sharply. Higher than who? Caleb didn't want to say it. Higher than you, Elena whispered. The truth settled like ice. You adopted me through them, Elena said. They handled everything. Yes, Caleb admitted. Elena's hands clenched. So the same system that gave me to you, took me from her. Caleb looked shattered. I didn't know. I believe you, Elena said. But someone in that building did. Lillian leaned forward. This is why they buried it. 2 signatures mean 2 witnesses. One wanted it hidden. Elena stared down at her phone. There's an address attached to the second signer. It's still active. Caleb's pulse jumped. You mean they're alive? Yes. Silence fell again, deeper than before. You're not going there alone, Caleb said firmly. Elena met his eyes. I wasn't planning to. They left the diner just after midnight. The rain had slowed to a mist, the city glowing under streetlights. The address led them to a quiet suburban street. Well-kept lawns. Neat porches. A place that looked nothing like a conspiracy. They parked across the road. A single light glowed in the front window of the house. That's it, Elena said. Lillian's heart pounded. What if they don't talk? Elena opened her door. Then we listen anyway. They walked up the path together. Caleb knocked. Footsteps approached from inside. The door opened just a crack. A woman's face appeared. Mid-60s. Tired eyes. Recognition flickered just briefly before she masked it. Yes? The woman asked. Elena stepped forward. You signed a birth release 15 years ago. For a baby you never delivered. The woman's face drained of color. I don't know what you're talking about, she said quickly. Elena held up her phone. We have the record. Your ID number. Your signature. The woman swallowed. Please, she whispered. Not here. She opened the door wider and stepped back. They entered a living room frozen in time. Old furniture. Stacks of papers. A photo on the wall of a much younger woman in a hospital uniform. I didn't think this would come back, she said, voice shaking. I was told it was handled. By who? Caleb demanded. The woman looked at him. By your wife. The words hit like a physical blow. Caleb staggered back. That's impossible. Your first wife, the woman continued. The one who died. Lillian's heart thundered. She wanted a baby, the woman whispered. She couldn't have one. When she found out about the mother in that ward, she arranged everything. Elena felt the floor tilt beneath her. You mean, she said slowly, my father's wife stole me? The woman nodded, tears streaming now. And I helped her. Caleb sank into a chair, breath ragged. Elena turned to him, eyes blazing with a grief so sharp it hurt to look at. So the truth is worse than we imagined, she said. And in that moment, none of them could tell which wound would bleed the most. The past had just chosen a side. And it wasn't done taking things. No one spoke for a long time. The old clock on the wall ticked softly, counting out the seconds in a room full of shattered truths. Caleb sat frozen in the chair, staring at nothing. His face looked hollow, like the weight of the revelation had pulled something out of him. My wife is dead, he said finally. She can't defend herself. The woman who had opened the door wrapped her arms around herself. I know. But the truth doesn't die with people. Elena's hands were shaking. You helped her take me from my mother. The woman nodded, tears sliding down her face. She was desperate. She said you'd have everything. Stability. A future. And my birth mother? Elena snapped. What about her future? The woman flinched. I was told she signed. You knew she didn't, Lillian said quietly. The woman's eyes met hers. Yes. Lillian felt a familiar ache in her chest. The same helpless rage she'd felt all those years ago in that hospital room. Why come back? Elena asked. Why sign it twice? Because the first paperwork was challenged internally, the woman said. A nurse raised concerns. Lillian felt the air leave her lungs. That was you, the woman whispered. Yes, Lillian said. They needed another signature to lock it down, the woman continued. Someone with higher clearance. And you did it, Elena said. I was afraid, the woman said. I had my own debts, my own mistakes. Elena let out a shaky laugh. Everyone keeps saying that. Caleb stood slowly. My wife told me she'd gone through the right channels. She didn't, the woman said. She went through me. The words landed heavy. You loved her, Elena said to Caleb. And she did this. Caleb's voice cracked. I didn't know. I believe you, Elena said softly. But that doesn't make it hurt less. Lillian stepped closer to Elena. Your birth mother never stopped looking for you. Elena nodded, eyes glassy. They told me. She came back when she got clean, Lillian said. She wanted to see you. And you still let her leave without me, Elena whispered. I had no proof, Lillian said. I was already being watched. Elena wiped her face. So everyone was trapped by someone else. Yes, Lillian said. And you were the one who paid for it. Caleb looked up. What happens now? The woman swallowed. The records Elena found, they're not all there is. Elena's heart skipped. What do you mean? There are files, the woman said. Physical ones. Stored in the hospital archive. They were never digitized. Lillian stiffened. Those could prove everything. They could also ruin people, the woman replied. Elena's eyes hardened. Some people deserve that. The woman nodded slowly. I'll tell you where they are. Caleb straightened. You're coming with us. I will, the woman said. I owe her that much. Elena looked between them. I don't want revenge, she said. I want my story back. Lillian reached out, taking her hand. Elena didn't pull away. Outside the rain had stopped. The street glistened under the lights. As they walked back to the car, Elena looked up at Caleb. Do you hate her? Caleb swallowed. I don't know how to feel. Elena nodded. That makes two of us. They drove in silence toward the hospital, the place where everything had started. And somewhere deep inside that building, the truth waited. Not buried. Just hidden. And it was about to come into the light. The hospital looked different at night. St. Mary's rose against the dark like a quiet monument, its windows glowing softly, its brick walls holding decades of secrets. The main entrance was closed, but a side door near the administrative wing still accepted staff badges. The woman from the house, her hands shaking, swiped a card. It beeped green. They stepped inside. The air smelled of antiseptic and old paper. Hallway lights buzzed faintly overhead. Every footstep echoed too loudly, like the building was listening. "This way," the woman whispered. They passed offices, closed clinics, empty waiting rooms with chairs neatly stacked. The hospital felt asleep but not at rest. The archive room sat at the end of a narrow corridor. A small plaque read records, restricted. The woman typed in a code. The door clicked open. Inside, shelves rose to the ceiling, lined with boxes and binders. Decades of lives reduced to paper and ink. "Birth records from that year are back here," she said. They moved carefully, scanning labels. Elena stopped in front of one shelf. "Here." Lillian pulled a box down and set it on a table. Dust puffed into the air. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Inside were folders marked by date. They found Elena's in seconds. The file was thick, thicker than it should have been. Caleb flipped through it, face growing more rigid with every page. "There are 2 sets of release forms," he said. 2 narratives. "One for the court," Lillian murmured. "One for the truth." Elena took the folder, flipping to the back. "There's a letter," she said. "Handwritten. Faded." She read it aloud. "To whom it may concern. I'm not giving up my child. I am being pressured. I am being told she is dead. This is not true. Please, if anyone finds this, help her find me." Elena's voice broke. "That's her," she whispered. Lillian pressed a hand to her mouth. Caleb closed his eyes. "That's proof," Elena said, "that she never consented." The woman nodded. "I didn't know about the letter. They hid it." Footsteps sounded in the hallway. All 4 of them froze. The archive door creaked open. A security guard stepped in, eyes widening. "What are you doing in here?" he demanded. Caleb straightened. "We have legal reason to be here." The guard frowned. "It's after hours." Elena held up the file. "This is my life. And someone tried to erase it." The guard hesitated, then looked at the woman. Recognition flickered. "You shouldn't be here," he said quietly. "Neither should these files," she replied. The guard glanced at the clock on the wall, then back at them. "You have 5 minutes," he said. "That's all I can give you." Elena hugged the folder to her chest. They gathered everything they could. Copies, letters, signatures. As they hurried out, Lillian felt the weight of the past lifting just slightly. Outside, the night air felt cold and clean. They stood beneath the streetlights, the hospital looming behind them. Elena looked at Caleb. "Now what?" Caleb took a deep breath. "Now we stop letting people hide." Elena nodded. For the first time since this began, there was something steady in her eyes. Not peace, but purpose. And that was enough to keep going. The hospital looked different at night. St. Mary's rose against the dark like a quiet monument, its windows glowing softly, its brick walls holding decades of secrets. The main entrance was closed, but a side door near the administrative wing still accepted staff badges. The woman from the house, her hands shaking, swiped a card. It beeped green. They stepped inside. The air smelled of antiseptic and old paper. Hallway lights buzzed faintly overhead. Every footstep echoed too loudly, like the building was listening. "This way," the woman whispered. They passed offices, closed clinics, empty waiting rooms with chairs neatly stacked. The hospital felt asleep but not at rest. The archive room sat at the end of a narrow corridor. A small plaque read records, restricted. The woman typed in a code. The door clicked open. Inside, shelves rose to the ceiling, lined with boxes and binders. Decades of lives reduced to paper and ink. "Birth records from that year are back here," she said. They moved carefully, scanning labels. Elena stopped in front of one shelf. "Here." Lillian pulled a box down and set it on a table. Dust puffed into the air. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Inside were folders marked by date. They found Elena's in seconds. The file was thick, thicker than it should have been. Caleb flipped through it, face growing more rigid with every page. "There are 2 sets of release forms," he said. 2 narratives. "One for the court," Lillian murmured. "One for the truth." Elena took the folder, flipping to the back. "There's a letter," she said. "Handwritten. Faded." She read it aloud. "To whom it may concern. I'm not giving up my child. I am being pressured. I am being told she is dead. This is not true. Please, if anyone finds this, help her find me." Elena's voice broke. "That's her," she whispered. Lillian pressed a hand to her mouth. Caleb closed his eyes. "That's proof," Elena said, "that she never consented." The woman nodded. "I didn't know about the letter. They hid it." Footsteps sounded in the hallway. All 4 of them froze. The archive door creaked open. A security guard stepped in, eyes widening. "What are you doing in here?" he demanded. Caleb straightened. "We have legal reason to be here." The guard frowned. "It's after hours." Elena held up the file. "This is my life. And someone tried to erase it." The guard hesitated, then looked at the woman. Recognition flickered. "You shouldn't be here," he said quietly. "Neither should these files," she replied. The guard glanced at the clock on the wall, then back at them. "You have 5 minutes," he said. "That's all I can give you." Elena hugged the folder to her chest. They gathered everything they could. Copies, letters, signatures. As they hurried out, Lillian felt the weight of the past lifting just slightly. Outside, the night air felt cold and clean. They stood beneath the streetlights, the hospital looming behind them. Elena looked at Caleb. "Now what?" Caleb took a deep breath. "Now we stop letting people hide." Elena nodded. For the first time since this began, there was something steady in her eyes. Not peace, but purpose. And that was enough to keep going. Morning came with a pale, fragile light. None of them had slept. The documents were spread across the long dining table like pieces of a broken mirror. Copies of signatures. Hospital letters. The note from Elena's birth mother, still stained with faint, uneven ink where tears had fallen years ago. Elena sat at the center, staring at it. Caleb stood at the window, hands behind his back, watching the sun rise over a city that suddenly felt unfamiliar. Lillian stayed close to Elena, not touching her, just present. "I keep thinking," Elena said quietly, "that she died believing I was gone forever." Lillian nodded. "She didn't stop loving you." "That makes it worse," Elena whispered. "And better." "Both." Caleb turned around. His eyes were red. "I loved my wife. I still do. But I don't know how to hold that and this at the same time." Elena looked up at him. "You don't have to decide today." He nodded, grateful. A knock came at the door. All 3 of them stiffened. Caleb went to answer it. 2 people stood outside. A woman in a simple suit. A man holding a briefcase. "Mr. Caldwell?" the woman asked. "We're with the hospital network's compliance office." Elena felt a chill. They already know. Caleb stepped aside. "Come in." They sat at the table, their professional calm clashing with the storm of emotions in the room. "We received a request for archived records last night," the woman said. "Some of those files were accessed without proper authorization." Elena met her gaze. "They were my records." The woman hesitated. "That may be, but..." "Those files prove a crime," Lillian said. "A child taken from her mother without consent." The man with the briefcase opened it. "We're not here to suppress anything," he said. "We're here because once a second signature appears, liability changes." Caleb folded his arms. "In other words, someone else is going down." The woman didn't deny it. "Who?" Elena asked. "The legal liaison who processed the second form," the woman replied. And anyone who directed her. Elena swallowed. That includes my father's wife. The room fell silent. She is deceased, the woman said carefully, which complicates things. But her actions can still be acknowledged. Caleb closed his eyes. We can issue a formal correction, the man continued. Amend Elena's records. Publicly recognize her birth mother as her legal parent at the time of birth. Elena looked at Lillian. Even now? Yes, the man said. It won't change the past, but it will change the story history tells. Elena nodded slowly. I want that. And legal action? Caleb asked. That's up to you, the woman replied. Elena took a breath. I don't want revenge. I want her name back. They agreed to everything in writing. After they left, the house was quiet again. Elena stood holding the letter. I want to visit her, she said. Her grave. Lillian smiled softly. I know where it is. Caleb reached for his keys. Later that day, they stood in a small cemetery on the edge of town. Wind moved through the trees. Birds called softly. Elena knelt in front of a simple headstone. No grand words. Just a name and 2 dates. I'm here, she whispered. I'm sorry it took so long. Caleb stood a few steps back, tears sliding down his face. Lillian knelt beside Elena. She would have wanted this. Elena reached out and took her hand. For the first time there was no fear in the touch. Just connection. As they walked away, Elena glanced back one last time. I don't know what my life looks like now, she said. But it's mine. Caleb nodded. And I'm here if you want me. Elena hesitated, then nodded back. Lillian watched them, her heart full and aching all at once. The truth had finally been spoken. Not loudly. Not cleanly. But honestly. And sometimes, that was the only kind of healing that lasted.